enjoy the Super Bowl.
Well, who's that on the podcast? Somebody slipped in on us here.
Kyle Rice from Wyoming might have landed in the God Journey podcast again.
Wow,
for another round.
You work the millennial desk here at the God Journey.
That is. I guess that's my new brand. I'll take it. I'll jump on that.
I guess I work the senior desk.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything about your seasoned life experience.
Well, it's the first time. Last week was the first time I've been in a conversation in which my age was a negative factor in being involved in a certain kind of presentation. Isn't that sad?
I guess unpack that a little bit for me. How
it was about language of healing and how we take it onto college campuses, and from a university president, particularly referring to Bob and I, you guys are a bit old to have an appeal to the college folks. So if you're going to look to have that open, maybe better off using the sketches in the book instead of your photograph. And it was interesting. Said you guys overcome it well. You get in a room with young people and they'll be engaged by what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's just the perception of older white men don't have much to say to us. And I get it. I do get part of that. I don't get the dismissiveness about age, because the wisest people I've known through my whole life have been older than me. And I mean, I did my old geezer tour a few years back, man. I was talking to people in their 80s and 90s just to glean the wisdom. And I'm afraid there's just a whole lot of wisdom in our culture that has pretty much been tossed aside just because I'd rather hear it from an entertaining 35-year-old standing in the pulpit or standing somewhere, rather than someone who has a seasoned life experience and really knows a lot of what's being blown at you from the pulpit is a bit of smoke and mirrors. Anyway. So I guess I'm feeling my age this week. I'm going, oh, you know what? I'm just about done. I'm just about the finish line. Be done with it. Got nothing more to say. Nobody wants to listen. So there you go.
Well, as a millennial, I'm going to say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And that I would strongly disagree with the age and you feeling your age, because I don't know if your listeners were aware of some of the meeting that you and I and a few other guys around the country did. Have we talked about that on the podcast before?
No, probably not.
So, long story short, there was an individual who reached out to Wayne and wanted to do some discipleship, some mentoring. And Wayne reached out to some other individuals that he thought would benefit from that process. And so we got to enjoy some time together. We came out to your guys' place for a weekend and got to meet each other and got to do some face-to-face relationship building. Got schooled very hard in the art of bocce ball.
Good. You needed that, boy. All of you needed that.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. And that was the first time that I realized that you are a very good trash talker. I had to kind of completely rewind and step up my game a little bit because there was some serious trash talk going on.
Is there a healthy point here, Kyle? Are you going to something that's not humiliating for me?
Oh, it was good. It was excellent. Okay.
I can do my share of trash talking, no doubt about it.
I shared with some of my friends that are from their late 20s to mid 30s about the conversations that I was having with this group of guys. And I was the youngest by probably 15, 20 years, roughly.
Probably.
In that group.
Not by that. Not everybody, but mostly.
It was just such a delight for me as an early 30-something, as a newer husband, to be able to just hear the experiences of people who had more life experience than me. And I remember just sharing with some of my guy friends about this conversation, and they, every single time I talked about it, their response was, man, I don't know where to find those conversations. I would love to be in those conversations, but I just don't even know who to even reach out to.
Well, we ended that group, so I guess it's open.
All right. Sounds good. We're gonna start your old geezer tour, and you get to be the lead of that show.
I'm the old geezer. Maybe that's the new podcast, the Old Geezer Podcast. No, it was a great time exploring things together. That's what's always benefited my life. Someone asked me this week, what has most influenced you, and they were talking about books and all. It's
Mm-hmm.
never been books. It's been people. I've always had people around me 10, 15 years my senior who, when you just really want to talk out something, you got a place to talk it out and someone to, and what I love about these guys, a lot of people when they get old get crotchety and mean and bitter and all that stuff. But people who get older and wiser and are not trying to make you see it their way, they just drop some stuff in. You can take it, not take it. It's not going to bother them one way or another. So they're not trying to control the moment, but they're just giving you the benefit of what they've experienced and seen. And sometimes it's amazing. A little comment will open a whole wide door to a part of your life that you never even knew a door was there. And suddenly it opens and there's this huge space to think in a different way than you've been thinking before. And I find that incredibly valuable.
And I would completely agree with that. So I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast.
Yeah, but I got to answer your question before we get up to the next podcast, Kyle.
Yeah.
I did watch the Super Bowl. I did.
You did watch the Super Bowl.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm glad that's over.
That you were rooting for?
Sports is kind of a crazy deal. You know, I got 32 teams, a whole bunch of guys on them. Only one team ends the season happy. Everybody else gets nuked somehow. Yeah, my son's a Niner fan, so, you know, I don't want to see him too disappointed. But then there's the whole Andy Reid, Kansas City, and been there 50 years kind of thing. And they're kind of leaning into that space. I didn't really have a dog in the fight. Did you watch it?
I did get to watch it. I was similar to you. I'm not a huge professional football person, but I enjoyed getting to watch the Super Bowl. Didn't really have a dog in the fight either, but really enjoyed watching. It was a good game. I mean, they really battled back and forth, and they played it all the way to the end because it could have been very easy for the Chiefs to give up if they wanted to. But they stepped up, and they played until the very last second of the game, and so that made it a lot of fun.
It made a lot of fun. A friend here from Mexico says, how is it that you guys have world championships when only American teams are there? It is the American hubris that has World Series and Super Bowls and world championships, and we're the only ones that have teams that even compete. But
it is a bit suspicious, that is for sure.
For sure. So you listened to the podcast last week with Tracy, eh?
I did, yeah. And it just, tying back into what we were talking about a little bit earlier about accessing people who have gone before us and just gleaning from their wisdom, their life experiences. I've been working a lot with teens, as some of our podcast, or as some of our listeners know. I work as a guidance counselor at a high school. I coach volleyball, and so I have a lot of interaction with teens. And just this week has just been the question about identity formation has come up so strongly in my world. Partially, students. I've got a few students that are really exploring transgender and really wrestling with how they're going to identify themselves, and they've chosen to make their sexual orientation their primary identifier. And yet they're really wrestling with this need to connect and this need to be accepted for who they are, and yet they're also choosing. They're making a public declaration of their sexuality in a conservative Midwestern environment, Western environment, where it's also having that negative effect where it's ostracizing them from their peers that they're wanting to connect with. And it's really interesting because I'm seeing two camps starting to come in my school system. I see there's a couple of individuals that do identify as gay or LGBTQ, and yet that's not their primary identifier. These individuals, they are very active in extracurricular activities. They are very active and engaged in the academic environment, and they're really strongly pursuing a college degree program. I mean, it looks like they're going to graduate with an associate's degree and a high school diploma simultaneously, and yet they are very, very accepted by their peers. They're very liked across the board in this small school. But their sexuality is a piece of who they are, but it's not the primary flag or the primary banner that they're waving. And then there's another audience that also identifies as LGBTQ. It is the banner that they have chosen to wave, and they're very confused / hurt when their student body does not receive that well, or is backlashing against that, or is displaying prejudice or discrimination against that. And I would love your thoughts on this, Wayne, as far as identity formation and what you're seeing. Jess and I are trying to parent a foster son that's a teenager, and watching him grow in identity. And yet, I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is a lack of engagement by older generations in young people's lives. And because of that, these young people are kind of aimlessly floating through this pivotal stage of life without really any direction, without any insight or input. The primary inputs that they're getting are from TikTok videos and from the next big influencer on Twitter, who they have no relational engagement with whatsoever. But that's who is left in their life to help them navigate conversations about identity, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, or spiritual beliefs. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what are you seeing as you are traveling around the world and helping people in this process?
Well, I'm not helping a lot of teens, quite frankly, who are dealing with the LGBTQ thing. If we move identity beyond that a little bit to just what are we going to stake our identity in? I'd be curious, Kyle, as to what you think you stake your identity in. Where do you find your identity? What does that mean to you?
For a long time, initially, especially in my teens, it was my religious performance, my athletic ability, and my willingness to follow the rules. So I was the oldest in a family, and so I had a very authoritative father figure, and so it was his way or the highway, and if you didn't follow the rules, the consequences were pretty severe. And so I adopted that rule follower mentality, and especially in growing up in a conservative Christian setting, that made me an ideal candidate to be the poster child for teen Christian leadership. And so that was one of the primary identifiers that I used. And then track was a big thing for me. I was on eating regimens. I was pursuing personal trainers. My dream was to run Division I track. So that was a major identifier for me. So those are the two, I would say, primary ones. And the funny thing is that all crumbled the first 18 months of college. So right before I left for college, I was invited to be the guest speaker at this major youth conference. There was about 400 teens from around the valley that all came together to this youth conference, and I was supposed to share my testimony. And I got up in front of all these teens, and here comes Kyle Rice, Christian superstar, and I went to go share my testimony and realized in front of 400 of my peers that I didn't believe a single thing that I was about to say. I just walked off the stage. I couldn't even say anything to them. I just said, "Hey guys, I was going to try to share something with you guys tonight, but I just can't." And literally walked off the stage, and my youth pastor, my mentors were all like, what just happened?
You didn't try to bluff it or nothing, huh?
I just walked off.
I've never not been able to bluff it when I've needed to. I've always been able to just, even if it's smoke and everybody knows it's smoke, everybody pretends, still claps when you're done, and you just go away, and then nobody remembers anything. I remember being young, and the quest for identity of some kind. For me, it was, going forward at a young age to commit myself to full-time Christian service. And there's a certain amount of, hit you get from that. And people think, wow, this is amazing. This boy is going to be for Jesus kind of a thing. And the sports thing, whatever you're good at. I got my pilot's license at 17. So there's a stake there. I look back though, from where I look back now and say, what is identity? Even some of the comments from last week's podcast, some of the stuff in the blog, which I thought was interesting. One comment said, there ought to be more celebration and emphasis of our union with Christ and how that gives us worth, identity, and a place in a family rather than our union with another human being, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual or whatever. And that really resonates with me. We said last week, I don't navigate life as a heterosexual male. I don't even navigate. I was thinking about this today, knowing we were going to talk a little bit about this. I don't navigate life as an author, even though people treat me that way. I don't. When I'm with someone, I'm with another person as a person. And so I was asking myself that where have I taken my identity? And wasn't that all those identity
Mm-hmm.
failed me? It's that none of them were satisfying. How do you live your life as an author? Or how do you live your life as a heterosexual male? How do you live your life? And it seems to me, and this is a lot that I've been thinking about lately, when we were created, God made us in his image, and he gave us this glory to live in us. And Romans 1 says we traded that. We traded the truth of who God was for a lie, because there are things that we wanted so bad, we couldn't have them and God. So in the language of the New American Standard, it says we suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. So I want this so bad that I'm going to because he said who God is evident, and it's plain in the world. It's not complicated. The reason it's complicated is because we put so many things in front of it that now I can't recognize him when he's right there. So we had this glory. We lost this glory in our own self-indulgent ways of thinking and living. And I think that quest for glory then goes to find it to find that glory in some kind of identity validation by whatever I choose to identify my life with. It may be vocationally, it may be athletic prowess, maybe academic prowess, it may be, whatever. And you hear that particularly in the LGBTQ community, that you express that, that they want to be validated. They can't sit with someone who says, you know what, I don't think this is God's best for you, but I love you, and I'm all for you finding your way and getting to know him. But if you need me to validate that, I'm not going to. And if I need you to validate my faith, I need you to agree that I'm right about it, then we're not going to have much relationship, right? And to me, identity got lost when we lost it for having it in God and his glory in us. So now we look for that glory to come from other people, which is validation. It's people pleasing. It's I'm doing something my peers like, and the problem I think in the LGBTQ community, particularly in the conservative areas, they're doing things that they think fit who they really are. And then their peers around them just find that awkward and give it, even if they're gracious and kind about it, they give it some distance because it's just out of the norm in the way most people think and act. I know that's not good language for people in that community. And so the real struggle is I need to be validated. I think that Twitter is that. It's Facebook comments are that. It's all about I need people to validate me. And I'm going to find a way to do it that if I can't get validated by a great group of people, I'm going to get validated by a niche group that I consider to be better than the other people. And religious people do that. It's not just LGBTQ people. I think religious people do the same thing. I think all kinds of, when you're going to find an identity in something other than, and here's where I land on my identity. I am the beloved child of a gracious Father navigating a broken world. That's my identity. And everything fits into that. When life is good, I'm blessed and relaxed and enjoy it. When life hurts, when things don't go the way you think they should, when people treat you mean, when, all kinds of things come unraveled, I'm still a beloved child of a gracious Father. Not when my circumstances demonstrate that. I'm that when my circumstances seem to demonstrate the opposite.
Yeah, it does.
Does that make sense?
As you're talking, I'm just thinking back to one of my favorite passages, which is Hosea 2. And it talks very much about the exact same thing, about how we sacrifice the incredible love of our Father and the identity as beloved for what it says in that passage as less wild lovers, as these other, and it's not that they were necessarily bad things, but they pale in comparison to the love that that God offers to us. And I love how Hosea 2 has been just a powerful passage for me that God's used for the last decade in my life. But it talks about how we have to we're chasing after these other lovers, these other things that we feel are going to bring us that fulfillment. Whether, like you said, whether it's being an author, being an athlete, being whatever orientation you decide you're going to choose. I mean, there's a whole plethora of ways to identify yourself in identity.
There is by your bank account, if you got, there's lots of ways. But I don't know of anybody who uses those things one who ends up happy.
Yep.
Because they never have enough. If you're looking for your validation in finances or in the job you have or whatever, you're going to meet somebody with a better job. You're going to meet somebody with more money. You're going to meet somebody with better health, better athletic abilities, better whatever. And then because I think our identity, if it's compensating for the lack of glory that we lost, then our act of looking for validation and all that is deeply rooted in our brokenness. And so it's not ever going to be satisfied. There's no enough. Because I'm staking our identity for the most part is comparative. It's not just being an athlete, it's being the best athlete. It's not just being an academic, it's not just being an author, it's having the best book sales. It's best selling. It's just everything is so competitive, just like the Super Bowl this weekend. One set of losers, one set of winners. Well, the guys on either team, they're not better people. They're not necessarily even better athletes. The game broke their way, and yet they get all this accolade and glory, and somehow we're worth something until next year. They're going to start all over. They're going to start at the bottom again and try to. And if that's where we're going to seek our validation, and I think Scripture, Jesus did, Paul did, he kept warning us, don't look for glory to come from another. If you do, it's going to warp you. You're going to have to act in ways to get people's approval. And I think religion, about sacred cow tipping, a term we haven't used in a long time. I think religion is all about using people's need for approval or glory or identity as a way to manipulate them, to conform them to the ethics, the ritual, the doctrine, whatever it is that we have. So when you do it, big pats on the back, man, awards, stars when you're little kids in church. When you're older, you get your name on a brick, man, because you gave money for this deal or that deal. And it's all about trying to fill that place of glory. But what I know after 67 years, that place never gets full. It doesn't. And it also always puts you at odds with the people around you. Being a beloved child of a gracious Father doesn't put me in competition with anybody. I don't have to be the most loved child. I'm loved. I don't have to be God's special child. I'm his child. And that puts me on a plane with everybody else, because so are you. You're God's child too. You may not even know it yet, but you're God's child. And you're loved. Even if you hate God and reject him, you are still loved. You don't have to live in that love, but it's there for you. When I see people with this quest for identity, define myself, my heart hurts. I just hurt, because I know that's a well that you'll never fill up.
For me, that's where my heart just is drawn to, is how do we create opportunities for younger people and people of my own generation, who basically whoever, but how do we create that opportunity for them to step into that knowledge of the love, that heart knowledge of the love of the Father? Because that's what happened to me as well. I got tricked into going to a counseling conference under the guise of me going and doing an internship. Then them telling me, well, you have to go and do this 10-day counseling retreat so that you can be a part of this internship. And really, it was my mom and my grandma and my supervisor all scheming together to get me some actual healing and some help. It was being in a moment where I felt at my absolute worst, like that all of my brokenness was completely exposed, and yet at that same time simultaneously feeling loved and accepted in a way that I still can't put into words. And I mean, it shattered depression in my life. It completely rerouted the entire trajectory of my life. Everything shifted in that moment. Because now, granted, was it perfect and has life been easy since then? No. That was in 2006, and it's been quite the journey since then. And yet,
but what did it then?
What did it then?
Because you asked me, what do we do for young people to help them discover this? What did it for you?
One of the things was that I did not trust male role models in my life. I did not give them a lot of space, and yet there was a gentleman that was there that very patiently just was there and cared for me. Not in a creepy way, not in a pushy way, but just was present. And come to find out, I found out later that he was the head of one of the largest churches in France, and that one night he was praying, he felt like God had told him, I want you to book a flight. I want you to fly over to this conference, and I want you to look for one person that I want you to show my love to. And I was the one that God pointed out to him.
Right. And how do you put that in a program?
How do you what?
How do you put that in a program or a book?
You can't. You can't. It's because I think part of it is those of us who have encountered the love of God being so intentional when God opens up those little opportunities for us to speak his love or his experience, or to drop that, like you said, that little nugget, that little just thought that God puts on your heart or on your mind for that person. Just be faithful in saying it and living out of that space of love, because that was one of the pieces that this gentleman offered to me. And the other piece was this counseling process helped me work through some wounds. But my biggest thing is that I made a vow that I would never allow anyone close enough to hurt me. And at that place, I felt seen unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Complete strangers, I felt like they could see into the depths of who I was. And that was so incredibly terrifying to me. And yet it was liberating at the same time, because they didn't reject me. They didn't toss me out. They didn't, it was their care for me, even in my brokenness as I was going through this healing process, stayed consistent.
That's what they say. The number one asset of what community engagement that changes the life of an at-risk youth is a caring relationship with a non-parent adult.
Yeah.
Now, I think parents have the first responsibility to set the identity of their kids. I do. I think you can love your kids in a way that sets them at rest and not having to find their identity by things in the world. But a lot of parents aren't wired that healthfully themselves. They're still looking for identity and other things. So they kind of wire their kid to be the best athlete at this, the best academic at that. So there's always the push. So in the absence of that, then a non-parent adult who takes an active interest in a teen, in a 20s, in the 30s. We're going to have somebody on here in a couple of weeks. It's going to talk about some new research about how much these younger kids, I think it's 17 to 25, I'm not sure what the age bracket is. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
How much they're hungering for older mentors, older people, men and women, to walk them through these kinds of things. And I think that's the key. I don't think we need a program. We need a better youth group. We've got to, get a better curriculum. It's not that, because you can be in a youth group and be uncared for or uncared about, where you're just a cog in a series of, we've always tried to mass produce the gospel, whether it's a catechism or a school of theology, whatever. We're going to mass produce it because it's these facts getting into that head that changes that life. And Jesus seemed to pass it on person to person. It's lunch with Zacchaeus. It's a woman at a well. It's taking the time. And I think for people like us that say, well, man, I would love to do that. Well, then put yourself in a place that accesses people that are younger that you want to be with.
Yeah.
You're not going to just walk to your front door and knock on it and say, hey, would you mentor me?
No.
You got to be where those kids are. I've got a friend who started a whole boxing training thing. Some kids came and found he was a Golden Glove boxer and said, hey, would you teach me to box? And he said, yeah, I'll help you. And so that's gone on to be 100 and some odd kids in 2 different cities now. He trains 2 nights a week. And he doesn't do it because he loves boxing. He does it because he loves those kids. And I was with him today. We met with one of the local police officers to help him understand what's going on and have some of the police come by and visit people. Because these are gangbanging kids. These are kids that are going the gang road.
Yeah.
If someone, because they're home, some of them come from abusive situations at home. And if someone doesn't take an interest in them, and part of the rules, you can't come to training if your homework's not caught up. I mean, it's just part of the way he's trying to give these kids a different option than just doing what's easiest with your friends. And I guess for all of us, that's really the challenge. Whatever our peer group is, you can be in your 20s and 30s and still trying to earn the adoration of your peer group. And it will wear you out.
Oh, absolutely.
It will. I mean, I've had both experiences in my life through which people appreciate and love and affirm what I do. I've had moments in my life where almost everybody I knew disaffirmed what I was doing and choices I was making. You're out of your mind, man. You got to just get back and do the normal stuff. And the being able not to be influenced by your peer and not to earn their glory, but to best know, because Jesus said in the high priestly prayer, John 17, Father, give them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one. This is not about competing for identity, for who's best, or setting our identity on a vocation, or even what some people do is set their identity on their sin. You know, I'm a horrible pornographic addict, or I'm an alcoholic, and they set their identity on that. Well, you can have those struggles, and you can be honest about those struggles. But Paul said, when I find myself doing the very thing I don't want to do, I realize it's not me doing it, but sin that dwells in me. And I love when people can make that distinction. I am not my brokenness. I am not the worst part of my life. I am not the sum total of the worst decisions I've ever made. I am a beloved child of a gracious Father, and I want to navigate the world with His wisdom, care, and life. And to me, that's always enough. And it lateralizes everything. It allows you to love people at that same level because they are too. If I am, they are.
Yeah.
And in that space, we can have some impact on people. I was thinking one of the phrases that I've been living with the last 2 weeks is Jesus in John 7, they're going up to the feast. His brothers are encouraging him to go. And he said, I can't go. They hate me. They're going to kill me if I go. And he says, because I expose, this was in the message, because I expose the evil behind their pretensions. And if in fact we're all craving glory from the world and from our talents, gifts, whatever, then that's mostly pretensions. And when someone exposes those, it's no fun unless you want it exposed. Peter, James, and John, they didn't mind having it exposed. They're ready to go on a different journey with Jesus. But the Pharisees, my goodness, they don't expose what we're doing. You do what you do to be seen and glorified by men. That's why you do it. Well, they didn't like him talking that way. They wanted to kill him. There's a wonderful thing in someone who's got Jesus involved in their life, that they can expose the pretensions in your heart in a loving way. This is what Dave Coleman, this is what Kevin Smith, I've had people in my life who've been able to say a phrase or two and you go, ooh, that opens up an ugly part of this. But then go with it. The tendency is seal it back up. Don't want to look at that again. I'm doing great. I'm a great guy. But to take a look and say, maybe I've got something wrong there. Maybe that is something I need to take a look at. But exposing pretension, that is part of this loving thing we're talking about. But if it's relational and someone's inside that in a way, it's doable. I bet the guy you talked about loved you. I bet there was a lot of love and acceptance there. I bet there was some truth spoken too.
Oh, absolutely. There was some hard conversations.
But if the relationship can carry that, because it's not just telling people what to do, it's just opening a door to, you're believing a lie here. And it's not always painful. My goodness, we were with somebody last week that just had gotten caught up in some situations that was overwhelming to them and just spent a couple hours with Sarah and I. Wrote back there and said, you know what, being with you too is like drinking a cup of cold water. And what we did was help her see some of what you're seeing here isn't real. It looks real, smells real. It's not real. And if you step back a little bit and look at it from a different vantage point, it's not as hopeless as your heart has wrapped itself around. And I think that's the gift of having someone in your life who has known Jesus a bit and can help adjust the pretensions, which we don't know their pretensions or we wouldn't do them, right? Most of our pretensions we think are reality. Mm-hmm. And I love when a human being, an older brother or sister, not necessarily in age, but wiser in the journey, can sit down and just open a door. Not teach a sermon or give a seminar on something, but just open a door to a heart that goes, oh my gosh, I'm looking for love in all the wrong places. I'm looking to find my identity in places that it's never going to satisfy. And that's true, it's not. Mm-hmm. Even we start with the Super Bowl, even these athletes, they're at the top of the game. And yet every athlete will tell you, when you no longer are on the team, you go from being craved by the media, from fans thinking you're awesome and everybody wants to buy you dinner and be with you and blah, 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 till you drop off the face of the earth. No one cares anymore. Yeah. And if you're not ready for that, if your identity was staked in that, at least for a businessman, it might last 40 or 50 years. An athlete gets 10 at most. Yeah. Maybe 15, not much more. And then it's back to what? I don't even know who I am anymore because I was the football player
Mm-hmm.
or the golfer or the golfers can go on quite a while. They don't have to face that till their 60s. Probably.
There's probably a couple of camps in our audience right now that one is saying, well, I don't know anybody like that. How do I find a mentor? And then there's probably some on the other side that are saying, well, how do I make that connection? I'm sure that there are people who are listening to this that are wrestling with one of those two perspectives. And I would just say to them that those of you who are looking for a mentor, or that's something that you're interested in your life, my guess is that you probably know somebody in your life that is already living out some of the character. It could be somebody that you look up to, somebody that you've seen at work, somebody that you've seen at your school that's been living out a lifestyle that's appealing to you. And I would say to you, take a risk. Go and ask them and say, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested in this or not, but I need somebody that can help me navigate this or help me navigate life. And I really respect the life that you're living. And I know that can be absolutely terrifying because, well, what if they say no? What if they reject me? But you won't know unless you try.
Yeah, and they probably are, if you're going to use the big words like, would you mentor me? Would you whatever? People will run. If you just say, hey, would you walk with me a bit? Do you mind if we get together once in a while? And if I can ask you some questions and just tell me what you see. I mean, I can't imagine most older brother, sister people wouldn't say, oh, yeah, I could do that.
Absolutely. Would you mind just getting coffee with me? I'd love to pick your brain about a couple of things.
And ask, I'm afraid after the story you told, everybody's going to be writing me saying, when are you going to start another one of those groups, Wayne?
Well, and then,
so I'm a little afraid of.
And then on the other side, the ones that are looking for mentees or people that they can pour into their life, oh man, I just want to affirm they are all around you. They are in your sphere, and you may not have seen them, or they might be the person that, in some regards, they're the last person you'd want to mentor. That they're the kid that is the absolute thorn in your side.
Yeah.
And yet they're there and they're in your life.
And let's not forget God in this too. The guy from France came over because God put something on his heart.
Absolutely. There was that
so
gentle
if you're
nudge.
looking for someone like that, ask God, would you provide someone? And then, like you said, look around, see who's there, see who's and that you could approach. And same way, if there's people, just say, God, where could I meet some people that could be valued by the things you've shown me? There's lots of places to go and just hang out and see what connection God gives you. And it takes time. Don't think you just go into a group and find yourself somebody. And the other thing I want to say before we close, because we're getting run out of time here, but for people who, we did this podcast, Tracy and I, about the precious gift of sex. And then there's a lot of people that felt like, hey, their marriage has been bad. They've never gotten married. And now I missed out this precious gift God's given. It was like, that's the do-all, end-all, man. And then we did this other podcast about looking at where your sexual inclinations, orientations may not seem to be in sync with what the Bible teaches. So what do you do about that? But again, these emails that have said, or comments, let's not put our identity in our sexuality. I think why Tracy and I want to talk about as a precious gift for couples who are struggling with it to go, it's worth working through this. It just is, because it's a great gift. But I would say most couples don't have a lovely, wonderful, well-communicated sex life that's bringing great joy to both of them. I know enough from talking to people that's not true. But it doesn't take away from the fact that every one of us doesn't need to have that. We weren't made to have sex on the planet. We were made to know God and walk in his glory and grace now. And this is just a shadow of the real glory that's to come in the life ahead. And that's where we set our hope. Mm-hmm. And so I hope people that don't fit into one thing or another, just because we celebrate something, doesn't mean everybody has to have that to have a fulfilling life. Yeah. Lots of ways God wants to fulfill us and give us gifts and lead us into his grace and mercy.
Good stuff.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.